The first transformer exploded just after sunrise. A deafening boom echoed across the valley. The city lights flickered once, twice, and then everything went dark. Traffic lights died. Hospitals switched to emergency generators. Factories fell silent. Phones lost their signal. Within minutes, millions of dollars in automated production stopped cold. Engineers rushed from one control station to another, staring at screens that refused to wake up. No one knew it yet, but the city's survival would soon depend on a man they had spent years calling a relic. A man whose workshop still glowed with the light of burning coal. 30 miles outside the city sat the tiny town of Ash Creek. It wasn't on most maps anymore. Its single main street held a diner, a feed store, an old church, and a weathered blacksmith shop whose wooden sign had faded so badly that only one word remained readable: Blacksmith. Inside the shop, 68-year-old Samuel Carter hammered glowing steel against an anvil. Each strike echoed with quiet confidence. His hands were scarred from decades of honest work. His face carried deep lines carved by years of heat, smoke, and sacrifice. He didn't own a computer. He didn't use social media. He never chased trends. He simply built things that lasted. Farmers trusted his tools. Ranchers trusted his gates. Neighbors trusted his word. To Samuel, craftsmanship wasn't a business. It was a promise. Years earlier, Ash Creek had depended on craftsmen like him. Then everything changed. Massive technology companies arrived. Automated factories replaced workshops. Machines replaced skilled labor. Young people left for city jobs. Traditional trades slowly disappeared. Samuel watched every neighboring workshop close its doors. Carpenters, wheelwrights, machinists, metalworkers, gone. Only his forge remained. People often asked why he refused to retire. Samuel always smiled. Steel remembers the hands that shape it. Most laughed at the answer. One afternoon, a convoy of luxury SUVs rolled into Ash Creek. Their polished black paint reflected the dusty road like mirrors. Leading the group was Victor Langley, the celebrated CEO of Langley Grid Solutions, the man newspapers called the genius behind America's smartest power network. His company had just announced the nation's largest fully automated electrical infrastructure: artificial intelligence, remote diagnostics, predictive maintenance, self-repairing systems. Investors called it the future. Victor called it perfection. The townspeople gathered outside the diner as cameras followed Victor. Reporters praised his innovation. Local officials applauded every sentence. Then Victor noticed Samuel's forge. Smoke drifted lazily from its chimney. Hammer blows echoed across the street. Victor chuckled. "What is this?" A reporter smiled. "One of the last traditional blacksmiths in the state." Victor laughed louder. "A museum piece." Several executives joined in. Victor walked toward the forge. Samuel looked up calmly. "Morning." Victor glanced around the workshop with obvious amusement. Coal fire, hand tools, bellows, anvils, iron tongs. Everything looked centuries old. "So," Victor said, loudly enough for the cameras, "people actually still pay for this." Some reporters laughed. Samuel wiped soot from his hands. "They pay for work that doesn't fail." Victor smirked. "Our machines manufacture in minutes what takes you days." Samuel nodded. "And when your machines stop?" Victor smiled confidently. "They won't." The cameras captured every second. One reporter leaned closer. "So you're saying craftsmen like him have no future?" Victor looked directly into the camera. "The future doesn't need blacksmiths." Laughter spread through the crowd. Samuel simply returned to his anvil. Without another word, he lifted his hammer and struck the glowing steel. The ringing sound drowned out every laugh. That evening, the interview aired across the country. Social media exploded. People turned Samuel into a joke. Old man versus technology. Hashtags mocked traditional craftsmen. Late-night comedians replayed Victor's comments. Milliologt. Samuel never watched. He simply fed another piece of coal into the forge. Only one person looked worried. Emily Carter, Samuel's daughter. She taught science at the local high school. Unlike many others, she understood both worlds. Technology and craftsmanship. Dad, she said quietly over dinner. You could have argued with him. Samuel smiled. You don't win every battle by speaking. She sighed. They humiliated you. Samuel looked toward the old workshop outside the window. No, he answered softly. They revealed themselves. Late that night, after Emily had gone home, Samuel unlocked a heavy oak cabinet hidden behind shelves of horseshoes. Inside lay dozens of leather-bound journals, blueprints, engineering sketches, handwritten calculations, old photographs, most dated back nearly 40 years. One blueprint was carefully wrapped in oilcloth. Across the top, faded ink read, Emergency Mechanical Grid Recovery System. Samuel unfolded it carefully. His expression changed. He traced one section with his finger, then quietly rolled it closed again. No one should ever need this, he whispered. Outside, lightning flashed across the distant horizon. He didn't know it yet, but the storm approaching the city wasn't made of rain. It was made of failure. 3 days later, the city's greatest achievement became its greatest weakness. At exactly 8:17 a.m., a single relay station on the northern edge of the power grid stopped responding. Inside Langley Grid Solutions state-of-the-art control center, engineers barely noticed. The artificial intelligence immediately rerouted electricity through backup lines. Green lights flashed across dozens of giant monitors. Problem solved, or so everyone believed. What nobody realized was that the AI had just pushed the entire network into a dangerous chain reaction. At 8:26 a.m., a second substation overheated. Cooling systems activated automatically. Then they shut down. Sensors began sending conflicting data. The software interpreted it as a communication error. Instead of isolating the failure, it redirected even more electricity into already overloaded transmission lines. Deep underground, steel cables expanded under unbearable heat. Concrete tunnels vibrated. Transformers groaned. Still, no alarm reached the executives. The system insisted everything remained stable. Victor Langley stood confidently before investors in a downtown conference hall. Behind him, a massive screen displayed his company's slogan, "The future never sleeps." He smiled proudly. Our smart grid repairs itself before humans even know there's a problem. Applause filled the room. Then, the lights flickered. Victor paused. The room went dark. Emergency lights switched on. Phones buzzed simultaneously. Executives checked their screens. Messages flooded in. Critical failure. Multiple grid collapse. System offline. Victor frowned. Restart the network. No one moved. An engineer swallowed hard. It isn't responding. Across the city, traffic lights failed. Subway trains stopped between stations. Hospitals switched to backup generators. Factories froze mid-production. Banks locked customers inside security doors. Water treatment plants lost pressure. Cell towers shut down one after another. Within an hour, millions of people were trapped inside the largest blackout the region had ever experienced. Television stations struggled to stay on the air. News helicopters circled above highways clogged with abandoned vehicles. Reporters called it unprecedented. Experts called it impossible. Inside the control center, panic replaced confidence. Hundreds of engineers stared helplessly at blank monitors. The AI had locked itself into emergency protection mode. No command could reach it. No remote system responded. Every automated safety feature depended on electricity, the very thing they had lost. Victor slammed his fist against the table. There has to be a manual override. Silence. Finally, an older engineer spoke. There used to be one. Victor turned. What do you mean used to? The engineer hesitated. 40 years ago, every major station had mechanical emergency backups. Victor frowned. So where are they? The room fell quiet. They were removed during modernization. At City Hall, emergency meetings stretched into the night. The mayor demanded answers. Military officers coordinated traffic control. Police struggled to prevent panic buying. Hospitals warned they had only limited fuel for emergency generators. Every hour made the crisis worse. The city had built everything around automation. Without power, nothing worked. Meanwhile, 30 miles away, Samuel Carter continued repairing a farmer's broken plow. The forge glowed warmly. The rhythmic sound of steel meeting steel echoed through the workshop. His old battery-powered radio crackled. Officials confirm widespread infrastructure failure. Samuel stopped hammering. Engineers have not identified the cause. He slowly looked toward the cabinet containing the old blueprints. His expression tightened. Then he quietly returned to work. Emily arrived just before sunset. She jumped out of her pickup truck. "Dad!" Samuel looked up calmly. "The city's completely shut down. I heard. They're saying nobody can restart the grid." Samuel remained silent. Emily lowered her voice. "You've seen that look before." Samuel nodded once. "Yes." "When?" He stared into the forge. 1986. Emily blinked. "I thought that project was canceled." "It was." But the design wasn't wrong. She followed him into the back room. Samuel carefully removed the oilcloth once again. Inside lay dozens of hand-drawn engineering diagrams. Massive flywheels, mechanical governors, steel linkage systems, hand-operated synchronization devices. Every page was filled with meticulous calculations. Emily's eyes widened. "You designed all this?" Samuel smiled faintly. "The team did. I've never seen these." "Nobody has." She slowly turned another page. At the bottom appeared an official government seal. United States Department of Energy. Approval signatures. Construction notes. Emergency deployment procedures. She looked back at her father in disbelief. "You work for the National Power Commission?" Samuel nodded. "A long time ago. You never told anyone." No one asked. 40 years earlier, Samuel hadn't been known as the town blacksmith. He had been one of America's most respected mechanical systems engineers. Before computers controlled electrical grids, every major power station relied on precision mechanical synchronization systems. Samuel specialized in building them. His designs had one purpose: to keep electricity flowing, even if every computer in the country failed. Then came the digital revolution. Politicians wanted modernization. Corporation promise de cheaper solution. Mechanical systems were labeled outdated. Samuel warned against removing every manual backup. His reports were ignored. His department dissolved. Blueprints disappeared into government archives. History moved on. Except Samuel never threw away his copies. Emily looked at him with disbelief. "Dad, they laughed at you because they didn't know." Samuel smiled gently. "They laughed because they thought progress meant forgetting." At that very moment, inside Langley Grid headquarters, a young engineer searched through thousands of archived engineering records. Anything, any forgotten solution. Hours passed. Dust-covered storage boxes filled the conference room. Most documents were obsolete. Then, he opened a faded maintenance manual dated 1986. Inside was a photograph. A younger Samuel Carter stood beside a massive turbine, smiling modestly. Below the picture were 6 words that made the engineer's heart race. Chief Designer, Emergency Mechanical Recovery System. The room fell completely silent. The engineer looked toward Victor. "You need to see this." Victor took the file. His confident expression disappeared for the first time. "Who is Samuel Carter?" The older engineer answered quietly. "The man you called useless." Victor stared at the photograph, then remembered the interview, the forge, the laughter, the cameras. His own words. The future doesn't need blacksmiths. Now, the future couldn't survive without one. The control room had fallen silent. Not because the machines had stopped. They had done that hours ago. The silence came from something far more terrifying. Every engineer in the room now understood the same truth. The answer had never been hidden in the future. It had been left behind in the past. Victor Langley stared at Samuel Carter's faded photograph. The smiling engineer, standing beside a massive turbine, looked nothing like the soot-covered blacksmith the cameras had mocked just days earlier. Victor's voice was barely audible. "Find him." A young engineer hesitated. "Sir, every road into the city is blocked." Victor slammed the table. "I don't care if you have to walk. Find Samuel Carter." Within minutes, police cruisers, emergency vehicles, and even a National Guard convoy were dispatched toward Ash Creek. Back in the small town, Samuel finished closing the doors to his forge. He brushed coal dust from his hands and extinguished the fire. The familiar rumble of engines echoed down the empty road. Emily looked through the window. Dad, black SUVs, police vehicles, military trucks. The convoys stopped in front of the workshop. Neighbors stepped onto their porches. Curtains opened all along Main Street. Everyone watched. Victor Langley climbed out first. Gone was the confident smile that had filled television screens. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His face was pale. For the first time in years, he looked defeated. He walked slowly towards Samuel. "I owe you an apology." Samuel said nothing. Victor lowered his eyes. "I was wrong." Still, Samuel remained silent. The townspeople exchanged surprised glances. This was the same billionaire who had laughed only 3 days before. Now he stood in the dust with his head lowered. "We need your help," Victor said quietly. "Our entire grid is down." Samuel looked toward the dark horizon. "I know. No one else can restart it." Samuel studied Victor's face for several seconds, then asked one simple question. "Did you come because you respect craftsmen?" He paused. "Or because your machines failed?" Victor couldn't answer. The silence said everything. Samuel turned toward his workshop. For a moment, it seemed he might simply walk away. Instead, he opened the old cabinet once more. He removed the weathered tube containing the blueprints. He handed it to Emily. "Bring my toolbox." She smiled. "You knew this day would come." "I prayed it never would." The convoy raced back toward the city. Samuel sat quietly in the front seat of an old military transport truck. The blueprints rested across his knees. He looked out the window at miles of powerless neighborhoods. Dark homes, silent factories, traffic frozen on highways, people standing outside with candles. He whispered, almost to himself, "When people forget how things work, they forget how to save them." The emergency operations center erupted as Samuel entered. Dozens of engineers stopped working. Many recognized him immediately from the archived photograph. Others remembered the viral interview. Whispers spread across the room. "That's him. The blacksmith. The engineer." Victor stepped forward. "The control center is yours." Samuel shook his head. "No." Everyone looked confused. "It belongs to everyone willing to learn." He walked to the enormous wall of dark monitors. Instead of touching the computers, he asked for paper, pencils, a ruler. Within minutes, he had drawn a complete mechanical synchronization diagram from memory. The younger engineers stared in disbelief. One whispered, "He isn't even looking at the blueprints." Emily smiled proudly. "He wrote them." Samuel divided the room into teams. "You," he pointed to one engineer, "go to substation 3. You, another, open every manual bypass valve. Disconnect every automatic relay." Victor interrupted. "But the AI." Samuel raised his hand. "The AI caused this cascade." The room fell silent. "We saved the grid the way we built it, before computers." For the next 12 hours, hundreds of workers followed Samuel's instructions. They climbed transmission towers. They opened forgotten maintenance tunnels. They unlocked rust-covered mechanical rooms no one had entered in decades. Many couldn't believe the equipment still existed. Heavy steel flywheels, mechanical governors, hand crank synchronizers, emergency disconnect levers. Most have been ignored for 40 years. Yet every piece still worked, because steel remembered, just as Samuel always said. Near dawn, the final team radioed in. Manual synchronization complete. Samuel nodded slowly. He walked toward an enormous brass lever mounted inside the oldest generating station. Dust covered its surface. Engraved into the metal were words few people had ever noticed. Emergency Mechanical Recovery System. Designed by Samuel Carter. Victor stared in disbelief. You built this? Samuel simply wrapped both hands around the lever. The entire room held its breath. Ready. Hundreds of voices answered over the radio. Ready. Samuel pulled. The massive mechanism groaned. Steel gears turned. Flywheels gathered momentum. Turbines began spinning. One by one, generators synchronized. Transformers hummed. Control panels blinked. Across the city, streetlights flickered, then burned steadily. Traffic lights returned. Hospital systems restarted. Factory alarms ceased. Water pumps roared back to life. Cheers erupted from neighborhoods. Families hugged one another in the streets. The city had electricity again. Inside the control center, no one spoke. Then someone started clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, hundreds of engineers stood on their feet. The applause echoed through the building. Not for technology. Not for billion-dollar software. For one quiet blacksmith. Victor stepped forward. Before every employee. Before every television camera broadcasting live. He extended his hand. Samuel looked at it. Then shook it. Victor faced the cameras. I called this man obsolete. He swallowed hard. I've never been more wrong. He turned towards Samuel. Everything we built stood because men like you came before us. Days later, the same reporters returned to Ash Creek. But this time, they weren't there to laugh. They watched children gather around Samuel's forge. Young engineers stood beside seasoned craftsmen, learning how steel was shaped by hand. The old workshop was no longer considered a relic. It became a training center where tradition and technology met. Above the entrance, a new wooden sign was hung. It read, "Progress never forgets its foundation." Samuel looked at the sign and smiled. Emily stood beside him. You finally proved them wrong. Samuel shook his head gently. No. He looked at the students heating steel in the forge. I simply reminded them. The hammer rang against the anvil once more. Its echo rolled across Ash Creek, not as the sound of an old trade fading away, but as the heartbeat of knowledge that refused to die.